Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. My name is Task Force Bourbon. Tonight we're going to be doing another review, but we have a special one in store that took a little bit of time to prepare, and we'll more of that in a little bit. But what we're going to be talking about is Old Forester, and more specifically, two of their Whiskey Row offerings that came together to make the perfect union, or the People's Choice 1915 blend. This really came out in the last couple of years, started trending in the bourbon community, and so we had to find out for myself and see what we thought about it. But like I always do, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Old Forester, a little bit about Whiskey Row, and these two expressions, the 1910 to 1920, and then we'll get into the tasting. We're going to taste the 1910, and then the 1920, and then we're going to taste the 1915 and see what it's about. So, real quick background, essentially, George Garvin Brown started this thing. He was born in September 2nd, 1846. That date's very important in Old Forester. Not only is its founders, that's when he came into the world, but every year on that day, September 2nd, they release a birthday bourbon annual offering. So that's an important date to remember if you're in the Louisville area. So he was born in Kentucky, and then in 1863, he moved to Louisville to attend high school and eventually became a pharmaceutical salesman. Later, he became a celebrated Louisville whiskey merchant and was one of the first to sell bourbon in glass bottles in order to ensure its quality. In fact, Brown put his signature on every bottle as his personal guarantee of the bourbon's purity. Prior to that, whiskey was primarily sold from barrels, and individuals filling the jugs was never quite sure what they were getting. And so we still see that true today. So if you look at the back of this, obviously this 1920 bottle that I've thrown a sticker on, probably not, exactly endorsed by the company. But the other bottles, they all hold the George Garvin Brown signature still on the label, right? That's important when you put your signature on something. Obviously, that's been done for him because he's no longer with us. And then in 1870, we're going to fast forward. That's where he really started seeing a need for a high-quality whiskey that would remain unadulterated after distillation. 1870 is before 1897. Smart, right? But 1897 is important because that's when the Bottle and Bond Act came out. That's really where we started seeing a mass movement led by really primarily Colonel E.H. Taylor, the Buffalo Trace brand that you know and love. Really led that initiative to ensure there was unadulterated spirits, that the consumer could have. But before then, you see George Garvin Brown really leading that initiative of quality assurances, and so he brings out this Old Forester brand, which he names after a notable Louisville surgeon. For some reason, they dropped the second R. His name was Forester with two R's. They dropped, or well, three technically, but two in the middle. They dropped that second R for whatever unknown reason. A lot of stories behind that. But, so that's maybe a little bit of alleged marketing, or at the very least to give consumers that warm and fuzzy of, hey, this was an endorsed product by, a doctor. So it's good to go, right? But really backing that up, he had to partner with his half brother Brown to open what is known as JTS Brown and Brothers Distillery. They saved $5,500 together, opened that distillery, and the rest is history. Getting behind Old Forester brand. So he had two things he was concerned with at the time. That was, obviously, we talked about it, quality assurances, but quality consistency as well, and to guarantee that George batches bourbon from three nearby distilleries: Mattingly, Melwood, and Atherton. He seals his whiskey in glass bottles, boom, becoming the first bottled, commercially available bottled bourbon on the market. So after a few organizational changes, George Brown became partners with George Foreman and renamed the company to Brown Foreman in 1890. Now that should sound very familiar if you're not familiar already with Old Forester. Obviously, Old Forester is owned by Brown Foreman Corporation, but that's the same corporation that owns Jack Daniels, Woodford Reserve, right, as an example of the conglomerate that they are. Besides being the first bottled bourbon, and they even got that written on their label, Old Forester's other significant claim to fame is being one of the 6 Kentucky distilleries to legally produce whiskey under medicinal license during the 13 years of Prohibition. So as a reminder, that's 1920 to 1933. Whoa, 1920. Where do I else see that? Oh yeah, that's right. The 1920 bottle offering. That'll come into play a little bit more later. Now, These are two expressions as part of the Whiskey Row series. So, but what is Whiskey Row? Whiskey Row, refers to a block-long stretch from 101 to 133 West Main Street down in Louisville that once served as home to the bourbon industry. Storefronts were built roughly 1852 to 1905, and numerous distilleries would transport whiskey barrels to the Louisville market for sale by train or wagon. Main Street became so extremely popular with whiskey firms that decided to name the buildings Whiskey Row. Now, I want to say it's about 2018. Old Forester comes back to Whiskey Row, and now they're using that same storefront that they did back in the day. And, so they named this series after the Whiskey Row, but each one of the expressions offers a glimpse into the Old Forester history. So I don't want to spend too much time on them because we're here for 2.5 bourbons. But 1870 is the original batch whiskey that goes back to what it tastes like, back when they blended 3 bourbons together, from those, nearby distilleries, bottling it, I think, at 90 proof. 1897, Bottle and Bond. Right, it goes to highlight what it tastes like back from Bottle and Bond. So, a little quick aside, actually, George Garvin Brown opposed the Bottle and Bond Act at the time, despite the fact that he essentially leads the initiative for quality assurances in the bourbon market. But they had to eventually bring up their proof level from 90 to 100, and that's the 1897 expression that you'll see in the Whiskey Row series. Then we go and see 1910 and 1920, and I'm going to pause there because I'm going to go in and talk a little bit about each in more detail. All those bourbons share the same mash bill: 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley. All are aged in a heat cycling warehouse and non-age stated because of that. They have been quoted as saying essentially it would be very misleading because in their terms, every year in that heat cycled warehouse adds what they say is an approximate additional 6 months of flavor to that barrel. So again, maybe misleading to have an age statement on it. And then another quick aside, they actually make their own barrels, which is super not common in the bourbon market. You see a lot of bourbons sourcing their barrels from ISC, Independent Stave Company. Great barrel manufacturer, but as we know and love, bourbon, that flavor, the color, everything we love about it, 80% of what happens in those barrels comes from the bourbon comes from that barrel. So when you see a company like Old Forester making their own barrels, it's really going to have its own unique stamp on it that others won't be able to share. So you got mash bill, obviously a big thing that lends to the flavor, and then barrels, right? Barrels is a huge one, and then obviously where it's aged. So we love Kentucky because of the climate in and out that liquid can go in and out of the barrel staves, going hot and cold, right? But so the climate adds a big piece to it, but the barrels, you can't forget about those. All right, so 1910 is essentially the first documented double barrel offering ever in the world, right? We start seeing, mass mainstream major releases in about 2012 when Woodford Reserve unveils its double oak offering. Jim Beam not very far behind in 2016. Kentucky Peerless doing some stuff, to bring that modern twist on things. It's one-offs, and then now it's just, flooded market. You see double barrel offerings. So double barreling means just that. So you have your original barrel that the bourbon aged in, and then they take it out and they throw it in a freshly new charred oak barrel. Double oak, as a point of clarity, does not refer to a finished bourbon. Now, it's sort of a misnomer because it is a double barrel in that sense, but when you have a bourbon that was then finished in a Chardonnay or Cabernet or port or whatever, barrel, you're going to specify it was finished in port barrels or something like that. Double oak should refer to, and sometimes that's not the case, but it should refer to a bourbon that was finished in another bourbon barrel, standard issue stuff that didn't have anything else that was in it at some point. So really, like I talked about, it represents a specific point in Old Forester's, 150 plus year history. But going back to October 1910, when a fire caused a bottling line to be shut down for an indefinite period of time. Complicating matters, there was a vat of mature whiskey waiting to be bottled. Otherwise, facing ruin, this whiskey was instead stored in new charred oak containers to rest until the line could be repaired. The resulting product, the first documented double barrel whiskey. So they dubbed this very old fine whiskey because it was different and a new expression at the time. So it got its own, name moniker. We have a quote here that says, there are often pieces of our brand's history that we happen upon by accident. Years ago, while searching through archives, we discovered a case of bourbon with a label I hadn't seen before. We uncovered that very old fine whiskey not only carried a great story, but a previously unknown heritage of double-barreled expressions, said Chris Morris, master distiller of Old Forester and Brown-Forman. Today, mimicking this historic bottling, this unique expression has undergone that second barreling in a lightly toasted, heavily charred barrel. Quote, mature Old Forester enters a second barrel at 100 proof, just as it did in 1910, said Old Forester master taster Jackie Zykan. The second barrel, quote, is charred nearly to the point of incineration. The slow entry proof allows more of the wood sugars to be dissolved in the whiskey, resulting in a smooth, sweet whiskey with a clean, spicy finish, yielding an exceptional character. So I am going to pause there. We're going to do a tasting of 1910 and keep allow my palate to cool down, go back so we can talk about 1920, do 1920 tasting, and then what we're all here for, the 1915. So I'll bring my first glass out of the night. And we have, make sure I got the right bottle in hand, 1910, bottled at 93 proof. Size used to be 750 milliliters, but as you can see, it's something I very much so enjoyed. That's a good secure cork. Get a little tiny pour here because I only have, like I said, a little bit left, but I actually want to do some at the end too, where we do a fresh mix and see if there's a difference between something that's been 30 plus days aged, or, well, I can't really use the word age, but sat, mixed, intermingled together versus, 2 seconds. So very gentle nose. I'm not a nosing expert. I'd like to think my palate's decently refined, but my nosing definitely needs some work. But I'm getting just a very sweet. I get some depth that I know is coming from that oak. So this opens kind of rich. Not like a sweet rich, but just rich, it's almost like eating like a really rich cheesecake or something like that. It's very smoky, flavors of, it's got like burnt flavors like caramel. That kind of leads the front. You do get that pop of rye on the mid, just very gentle. That's that 18% rye coming through. There it is. So that's what I was looking for. So on the mid, you also get some of that like a warm leather, but this is what I was looking for, that baking chocolate. I get this a lot on the 1910, the baking chocolate. It's almost like that bitter chocolate in a very fine way, pun intended. But not like your sweet, creamy milk chocolate or something like that, but very, so like a baking chocolate. So maybe there's a fruit on the back end. It's dark fruit. I can't really pinpoint it right now. But the finish has got, your nice sweet, mild type honey going on. It's very balanced. But again, you get the oak kind of all throughout. You don't get, even though it said charred to the point of incineration, mimicking a bottle plant fire. You'd think it'd be like very char heavy, like that very overly oaky, but it's not, none of those things. It's very balanced. And it sits on the back of the tongue. It kind of avoids the whole front to almost middle. It's really on the back. Yeah. This is a very fine bourbon. But why? What could it use? It could use some more sweetness. So the question I was about to say was, why would you want to blend this or change it at all whatsoever? There's a lack of sweetness going on. The oak, again, isn't overpowering if you like oak, especially, but it's a dominant attribute for sure. So maybe you'd like to see that less a little bit, balance that out maybe. and add some sweetness that you're going to get from the 1920. Spoiler alert. So I'm going to set this glass over here for now. So like I said, we'll move on to 1920 now. Let me skim down and make sure I got my stuff here. So 1920, like the rest, obviously represents another piece of Old Forester's history. It's the third expression. 1910 was the last, by the way. So 1910 came out after all. They were not released chronologically. 1920 was before it, taking the third spot in the Whiskey Row series release. But according to the neck tag on the bottle, quote, during Prohibition, only 6 distilleries, like we talked about, were granted permits to be bottled bourbon for medicinal purposes. Brown-Forman, maker of Old Forester, secured permit Kentucky number 3. In 1920, the first bottles under this permit were produced. Notably, during Prohibition, all whiskey needed to be bottled at 100 proof with a barrel entry of 100. The Angel share would have created a 115 proof whiskey at maturation. As a result, Old Forester has bottled this replication at 115 proof. It goes on to say, quote, to match the unusual barrel proof of that bottle after maturation is presented at that 115 proof. So, right, that's pretty much it. It goes under less filtration, apparently, than the rest of them, suggesting that there is some level of filtration, but you're going to have more of those conagers and things like that you get from, a non-chill filtered or something like that. Not to say that this is that, but you're going to have some more flavors there, and just by the way of the proof level, you're going to get the same thing. So we'll go ahead and take a clean glass and take a quick swig of water and pour ourselves a little bit of 1920 history. So this is what supposedly, our ancestors were consuming as medicinal whiskey back in the day. This is supposed to be that. And, spoiler alert, this is one of my all-time favorites. It's definitely like if I have a daily or, if I could call a bourbon a daily, I would say this would be a daily, offering, the 1920. So lucky them, I guess. Skips over the nose. It's sweeter, less oak. It opens more full bodied than the 1910. It's got some dark maple syrup going on, and tons of chocolate. Not the baking chocolate type, not a dark chocolate, not a creamy milk chocolate, but there's definitely more chocolate there. Rich dark caramel. You do get a little bit of kick of oak in some of that rye kind of sitting on the back end. Very subtle. 18% is something you might consider a high rye bourbon. But it doesn't have some of those signature high rye stuff like you get on like Four Roses or something. You're talking, goes up to like 30 plus odd proof or whatever for a real truly high rye bourbon. But you could definitely call 18% high rye, I think. Definitely drinks below its proof at 115. You'd expect more of a kick. I guess maybe I'm seasoned. My palate's acclimated to that, but really rich. A little floral notes on there too, but you get those dark chocolates, dark caramels, just deep flavors. So again, same question as I posed before. Why would you want to change this in any way? Because this is a very excellent bourbon, as it is. I could see one thinking it's too sweet, not like sugar sweet, but like that richness that comes off of that dark chocolate, dark creamy caramels, maple syrup kind of in the background. Like maybe it's a touch too sweet for some. Maybe it's too high proof because you got 115, and when these two come together, you do a little bit of math. 50-50 blend means that 1915 is a 104 proof. I want to make sure I got all that out because I'm going to actually use the same thing to do the two. All right, moment of truth. So a little bit about 1915. Like I told you, this came out a couple of years ago. Trending on the Reddit pages and the bourbon community and all that good stuff. But the master taster Jackie Zykan obviously heard about it too, and so she was interviewed by Whiskey Advocate at one point, and they asked her, what do you think about it? And she commented on the practice of combining two whiskeys, which she dates back to 1910, where that technically first arose. Being first released with the 1910 offering, prompting drinkers to cut it with other Old Forester products. So Old Forester 1950 works well, she says. Quote, that higher alcohol level that 1920 is bringing in with the lower filtration on it is sort of holding hands and doing really well with that super saturated and dense 1910 profile. So I think they work swimmingly together, she said. Quote, it just caught on as this quirky thing. We've kind of talked about maybe doing a small release of it just because it's good. I've also heard, I went to the distillery and I asked them, I said, hey, what's Old Forester's official position on 1915? And from what I gathered with them is they were supportive. Jackie Zykan, I guess, at some point maybe had done a YouTube video somewhere. I couldn't find it where she did a cocktail with using 1915. So as you can see by the quote we got from Whiskey Advocate and elsewhere, it looks like it's a supported thing. And if they offer it, as a release, even though I got it right here, I'm probably going to try to find my way and pick up a bottle. So what you do is you take this, you age it for 30 days. This was bottled on 29 March 2022, and today's date is the 30th of April 2022. So that makes it 30 plus odd days, and so you got that method, or you could sit there and you could mix it together in 2 seconds. We'll see how they compare. It's like you mix the two, but in a really well-balanced way, surprisingly. So it opens, again, smoky and rich, which is a characteristic I found on both, right? There's a bite of spice on the open through the mid, but backed by something creamy like a custard maybe, kind of vanilla-y. That vanilla ends up being a little toasted. I think you're getting less rye here too. And you do get maybe more of that corn. I mean, 78% corn is still a lot of corn. So you get a little bit of kind of graininess on the corn sweetness. You get also that fruit maybe that I was trying to allude to on the 1910. I think maybe I'm going to just call it a cherry without digging too far into what it might actually be, which is not what I got on 1910, but I did get a fruitness on the 1910. So it's there on this 1915, though. That fruitness kind of comes through a little bit more in the way of the cherry. Still get some of that baking chocolate on there. The finish is full of clove and baking spices. You do get a good heaping of oak kind of all throughout, really through the mid to the finish more so, but really well balanced considering the complexities that you find in there. Its proof level still 104. That's nothing to shake a stick at. I don't know if I like this. I love 1920. 1910 is a good go-to, but I like 1920 over 1910 for sure. For me, it'd go 1920, 1910, 1897, and then the 1870 offering. But I think I would put maybe this over the 1920. But it could be one of those things, like depending on the day of the week or whatever, I might like a little bit more sweetness, a little bit less oak, because you're going to find more oak on this 1915. What I'm going to do now, just a really, it's like a sweetness, but it's not sweet. Does that make sense? It's sweet, but not sweet. Got sweet flavors, got a little bit of that burnt brown sugar kind of on there. Because I'm saying burnt, it gives that like impression that like sugary bite that you would get from, like standard issue brown sugar if you just took it in a spoon and ate it. And it gives it more of that, just a flavor there. and you find some of the oak on the back end, kind of carrying up the back end of those notes. So what I'm gonna do is now I'm gonna take a quick little mix here. This is not a measured thing. I'm just gonna go, by guesstimation, because this is probably how most are gonna do it, right? If you just want to try it for yourself. All right, that's like a little splash. You saw that, right? And a little splash. We're just going to see, because this 50-50 mix is, again, not an exact science here on this bright glass. I measured, let me pause here, I don't want to mess up. That looks about the same. I measured on a measuring scale and used, poured out. I did, math. I had like, 10 friends help me with the math, because I'm not so good at it. For this offering, I wanted to make sure it was spot on. I'm going to let it sit for 30 plus days, right? So this one, not so much. Let's do a quick mix. There we are, 30 plus days, just a second ago. So what happens here on this bright glass, everything's standing out more. The sweetness of the 1920, the oak of the 1910. It feels like they haven't had time to meet one another. There's a little bit of imbalance on the end. It's like unbalanced. It's literally like you took two shots, boom, together. You're getting flavor left, flavor right in your mouth same time. But that means the balance isn't quite there. Whereas the 30 plus days, what's happening is they're kind of having a chance to like really sit together and find that level where they make sense with one another and balance out. Versus this seems to it feels like it's richer, which I'm kind of digging, to be honest. I really like the richness on the just now mix versus this is more mellow. The left glass is more mellow, more balanced. Glass just mixed is more in your face, and I think I'm getting more 1920 than 1910. Of course, it wasn't super measured, right, as comparative to the 1950 30-day offering I let sit. They're probably pretty close. So that's it. So if you've had 1915, I'd be really curious to hear what y'all think. If you've had 1920, 1910, I'd like to know what you thought in terms of where they fit into one another. Like, what did you like 1920 over 1910, or the other way around? Have you tried 1915 in both ways, like we did tonight? 30 plus days and mixed for 2 seconds. So I think my vote is to let it sit for 30 days because I like balance. I like the 1920 notes because I like 1920 better than 1910. So if you like that, maybe doing it real quick is not the worst thing in the world. And it works just fine with one another. But if you really want to strike that balance and more of an even keel kind of thing and get a little bit of that 19, because you're talking 93 proof versus 115. 93 proof's already in a losing battle there. What it's got going for it is that super strong double oak, that incinerated barrel. Maybe it just needs that extra, 29 day, 0.99 days plus some to really like come up and be like, all right, 1920. I've had my time to, I kept getting knocked down. I got back up and, Chumbawamba all the way up until it became what it is in this 30-day offering and became a little bit more well-balanced. So to all those out there who are just drinking bourbon, I say, pour a glass of Old Forester tonight, and if you can, make it a 1915. Until then, cheers, like, subscribe, do all that good fun stuff, and see you next time. Delicious.